Homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. Today we are making rhubarb syrup. And if you don't know about rhubarb, if you've never grown it, it's very sour raw, but it's delicious when you add some sugar to it. And I have videos already for a rhubarb custard pie, which I highly recommend. It's one of the things that I make this time of year. Of course, rhubarb strawberry jam is well known, and I made that for years as something that I sold with my farm shop. Rhubarb is a perennial plant, and it is so tough that a lot of times you'll find a rhubarb plant where there used to be an old homestead, even when the homestead is long gone. So this stuff survives for a very long time. I had it when I was living in Northern California growing up. I've had it in all kinds of cold climates all over the West. So pretty easy to grow in most of the US. And it comes in different colors. Sometimes the stalk will be nice and red like this one is. Sometimes it's more green. I don't think there's a dramatic change in flavor between those two things. And the leaves themselves are not edible. They are considered toxic, which sounds really scary, but basically what that means is they have a lot of oxalic acid. And oxalic acid is essentially the same stuff that's in spinach, but in a much higher concentration. They're bitter. It's not something you're going to want to eat anyway, but it's not toxic like it's hemlock, and it's going to kill you. You want the stems to be nice and firm and not pithy and hollow in the middle. They tend to get kind of pithy and hollow as the season goes on and as the weather warms up. So you want to pick these in the earlier part of spring and into maybe early summer, depending on where you live, but it's generally a spring crop. I have some varieties that bloom and some that don't, and I don't know what that's about. I've never been able to get a good definitive scientific answer on why certain varieties bloom really commonly and others don't, but I have some of both. And the great thing about this particular recipe for rhubarb syrup, I'm drinking a rhubarb soda right now. So this is made with rhubarb syrup, a little bit of fizzy water, and some lime, and it's just absolutely delicious. And not a lot of sugar compared to regular soda, because even though the syrup is really sweet, I'm just adding a tablespoon or so to a glass of water, and so quite a bit less than what you would have if you were drinking a regular soda. The great thing about this recipe, and the thing I really want to emphasize, is you can do this recipe with any fruit. And so the recipe is equal parts by weight of rhubarb and sugar. But we've been doing this lately with citrus rinds, and so orange peels and lemon peels, and you just weigh it out and then add an equal part of sugar. And basically by osmotic pressure, that sugar will draw out whatever oils and water are in that fruit rind or in that fruit. And you end up with a syrup that's highly concentrated, it's very sweet, and that is going to be a preservation. And so as long as you throw that in the fridge and you use equal parts by weight of the fruit and sugar, you're going to end up with something that's relatively shelf stable in the refrigerator. We've really loved this with citrus, and we've been doing this with both oranges and lemons, and then you just add a little splash of it to a cocktail, or I used some of it in a recent recipe that I posted for a copycat kale salad from Costco, where the dressing had a little bit of orange flavoring in it. It called for concentrated orange juice, and I didn't have that on hand, and so I just used a little bit of that orange syrup. But yeah, this works for any fruit as we start moving into fruit season. You know, in my area, rhubarb is really the first thing that's available, but then we get cherries, we start getting raspberries, we get apricots. This time of year, also strawberries, and then we move on to stone fruits as we get a little later in the season. So it would work with any fruit. And this is a great way to basically make your own homemade soda for you and for your kids. You do need to use actual sugar. You could probably use things like honey. That's a sweetener as well. It's important to use something that is actually going to create that pull of the moisture out of the fruit, and that's also going to act as a preservation. There's something called water activity, where sugar binds with moisture and hangs onto those molecules of water so tightly that they are not able to be free floating in the solution and start to mold. And so when you have a very high concentration of sugar, it is actually a preservation. And you're not going to get that if you're using an alternative sweetener like stevia or something like that. So it is important that you use actual sugar in this recipe, but rhubarb syrup, absolutely delicious. Let's get started. So I just sliced this rhubarb with a food processor, but you could certainly do it by hand. And this was some rhubarb that was a little bit pithy,
and not perfect that I couldn't sell, and so I decided to just use it for this syrup. So you can use sub-optimum rhubarb for this. I started out with 8 ounces of rhubarb. And again, I'm doing all of this by weight. And then I added 8 ounces of sugar. And within 3 or 4 hours, this had definitely sunk down a ton. And so I ended up adding another 8 ounces of rhubarb and another 8 ounces of sugar into this quart jar because it fit after it had been sitting for a little while. So the moisture got pulled out of that and it softened up really quickly. I'm just going to give that a shake just to kind of distribute that sugar throughout so that it's coating all of that sliced rhubarb. You want it on all of those surfaces. And then here's what it looked like literally probably 3 hours later. And you can see how much that sunk down. So I ended up refilled the jar and added more to it. And then I accidentally deleted the files of me filtering this. And so I ended up doing a second batch. And this second batch turned out to be a little bit more red. The rhubarb was a little fresher and it was from a different plant that had more red in it. But I'm just putting this into a fine mesh strainer and filtering out that syrup. And this takes less than 5 minutes probably before it's pretty much done. I ended up, out of almost a pound of rhubarb, I ended up with about 3 cups of syrup. And then I'm filtering this through an additional finer mesh strainer just to make sure that I get all the little pieces and parts out of this, but pretty straightforward. And this turned out to be just a beautiful color. And there you have it. We're done. Rhubarb syrup. And then just because I had this leftover chopped rhubarb, I thought, what if I just cooked this down and made like a rhubarb sauce out of it? So I added a little bit of water to this, maybe less than a half a cup, and just cooked that down for about 10 minutes. And ta-da, rhubarb sauce. And so I think this would be great with a baked oatmeal. It'd be great on yogurt. It would be great over ice cream. And so you could can this if you wanted to, but I don't use enough rhubarb that I want to can it. But there you go, rhubarb sauce as well. So bonus recipe. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.